From the PSIA-AASI Satellite Studios in Hood River, Oregon, I'm George Thomas, and you're listening to First Chair and hopefully watching First Chair as well. And love having Angelo Ross as a regular guest. Angelo, I really enjoy talking with you and learning from you.
Yeah, ditto, George. Appreciate being here. It's great every time.
So this is a really kind of a part two to experiential learning. We're going to be talking mostly about exploration and experimentation, correct?
Right, correct.
Let's start out with really a definition of the two. What separates those
Mhm.
two?
That's a good question because there is a lot of overlap, I think, between experimentation and exploration. And we just even back up a step briefly to um, the first episode we did related to this, which was about play. And the reason we did that episode is because in our teaching fundamentals, play, experimentation, and exploration are identified explicitly in the teaching fundamentals. And I made the case that because of that, they can be considered technical terms. So we described play as a structured learning environment with challenge and goals and rules and fun, but there was a structure to it. And so similarly, experimentation and exploration have distinct structures that we as teachers can employ um, to hope to ensure um, ease of learning, more efficient learning with our students. So I think the easiest way to look at it, the way I look at it, is experimentation is a problem-solving strategy in which you're examining the effect of manipulating one variable. So that's experimentation, just like a science experiment from school. Exploration is similar, but I think in exploration, you can examine a range of things, and it's possible to introduce more than one variable and still have um, a good environment for exploration.
I'd really like to get into both of these topics. So experimentation would be me getting another fun shirt, which I wear a different design every day, and taking that out into public and seeing how the reaction would be to that shirt.
So that
Sort
one shirt. But if you put on that shirt and a pair of plaid pants and a couple more variables, two Chuck Taylors that don't match, that would be exploration.
Oh, and I have the shoes that don't match, but they're in my car.
So you're most of the way there.
So how can we apply this to teaching? And what I would like for you to do here is answer this with maybe various levels of classes. So with a first time class, how can we get into experimentation then with an intermediate and an advanced, if that's all right?
Okay, sure. I'll take a shot at that. So we'll say a beginner class is on pretty mellow, mild terrain, no pitch probably that we would consider to be consequence. And say you have a student who's learning to turn, um, maybe they're struggling with it. So as the coach, you decide to do an experiment, and maybe you test to see if an internal cue works better than an external cue for getting these folks to turn. So the first thing you might try is the internal cue. And if you're on a pair of skis, you might say something like, I want you to focus on um, steering of the inside leg. So I want you to, flatten the ski and point the inside knee in the direction you want to go. If you want to go to the right, turn that leg, point the inside knee to the right and turn in that direction. That would be an internal cue because it's a body part that they're focused on. So they try that and they'll determine how successful they were. You'll help them determine how successful you think it was. And then you could compare that to the same thing, same pitch, same turn, same direction, same everything, but focus on something external. So if it's easy terrain and they're in a wedge, for example, a gliding wedge, you could say, imagine that the two skis constitute an arrow, and I want you to focus on turning the point of the arrow in the direction you want to go. And you give them something external to focus on. And if one of those for them was easier than the other, then you've conducted an experiment that maybe worked. I should throw in there that with experimentation, um, you change one variable at a time. And this is probably throwback to school years for some folks, but the independent variable versus the dependent variable. The independent variable is the thing that I decide to change. So if I'm conducting an experiment, I, as the experimenter, decide I'm going to change this thing. That's the independent variable. I change the independent variable. They both start with I. And what happens as a consequence is the dependent variable. What happens when I change this? Well, I don't know. It depends. That's the dependent variable. So I want to mention that just, just for the sake of understanding experiment as a structure. And I also want to add that it's not limited to alpine skiing. I gave an alpine skiing example. Could give a snowboard example too. Point this knee, point the tip of the board. It's not limited to alpine by any means. I don't want to give that impression.
And you could give a telemark example or one of the other bazillion things you're certified in, Angelo.
Yeah, you sure could.
I want to add something here and get your thoughts on it. A lot of times when I'd have a family private and you have a wide range of abilities, but they want to stay together. And sometimes you're directed, oh, just work with, George because he doesn't know anywhere near as much as Angelo does. And so George would be doing very beginner moves and very shallow terrain. In fact, we taught with a mini pipe for a while. And as the instructor, I would then have Angelo on the same slope, but do what we're doing on one ski. I want to see you hop on one foot and see you lift the entire ski off the snow, because generally on one leg, they'll drag the tail. And that actually was very hard. Or have your hands out in front of you and raise your knee where you can hit your hand, not lower your leg to hit your knee, to make it even harder because they're having to lift the ski up more. And people ended up having a lot of fun on very shallow terrain, even though they were very advanced skiers or snowboarders. What type of learning would you call that? Garbage? No.
Differentiated learning. If you as the teacher are thinking this could work for this student, but this different thing could work for this different student, and you're differentiating those tasks, that's what it is, differentiated instruction. Somebody really nuanced and multiple styles of teaching could probably at one time have an experimental setup going on with mom while dad is exploring this and the kid is doing this, so you somebody really savvy could differentiate and have structurally very different things going on in that same lesson. And I'd like to add though, because I've talked about this a couple of times and I seem to get stuck in the conversation on the independent and dependent variable part, but there's more that's relevant to experimentation. So you do this manipulation, you get your results, and then the steps that come after that in an actual experiment is analyzing the results, so reflecting on what happens, and then communicating that out to the world. So like in the scientific community, actual real scientists present that stuff as papers to the peer community. It's reviewed, and if it's accepted by the peer community, it's published in some professional journal, right? That's how science as a profession is communicated. And I think it's really neat to think about how we might use the rest of the scientific method in a ski or snowboard lesson to touch on those last parts, because as experiential, as educators that use experiential learning, there's that reflective part and communication between the students and the instructor. And I like to think of the tail end of that science experiment, the analysis and then the communication of results, as the debrief at the end of the lesson, where I ask you, George, so what did you think? What overall takeaway? And you tell me what you thought, and I restate that in my words and to confirm that I understand what you're telling me, and vice versa. I'd expect, well, okay, this is what I saw, and I explain it to you, and you articulate it back to me in your own words. I like to think of the debrief in a snow sports lesson as the communication bit in a real science experiment. So I think there's more overlap than just manipulating one variable. And And the more of those pieces of that problem solving strategy you use, the scientific method, the more complete the more completely you use that whole problem solving tool, I think the more you increase the chances somebody's going to learn efficiently.
So can you actually combine experimentation and exploration in the same move? So I'm thinking of turn initiation and turn completion, something like that.
Probably not easily. I think you'd have
Okay.
to be, I think you'd have to be a real wizard to pull that off. But I think you can combine those two things in the same lesson. And I try to be really cognizant of muddying the waters in a lesson and try to keep it simple. But yeah, I had a conversation with Ellen Post Foster a few weeks ago about this topic, and we got a kick out because we were hadn't spoken for a couple of weeks, but ended up thinking about it the same way. It's like once you do the experiment. So if you go back to the original example of turning the knee versus turning the skis because they're shaped like an arrow, once you establish that for this person, maybe turning the arrow is easier than turning the knee, then you can kick into exploration mode and start to explore a range of things. Well, what if on this run, you try, the top third, you do short turns that way. And then when we pass that tree, make your turns about double that size, maybe into a medium radius. And when you get past that flag at the bottom, make them real big the whole way across the slope and see if that still holds true. That structure would be a pretty sloppy science experiment, but it would be great exploration because you've got a whole bunch of stuff going on at one in one sitting. You know what I mean? So I'd say difficult to overlap quickly, but very likely to happen um, in the same lesson if that lesson's half a day, full day, week, longer term.
I was just thinking the internal cue, steer the point the knee, but let's have your ski pointed at that tree over there when you come to the finish.
As long as that tree's on the same side as the ski of the body, you're probably in good shape.
Then we're good.
You can do that Bugs Bunny thing around the tree, both one ski around either side of the tree.
So what I'm really hearing from you and picking up from you here is that this is really play, as you were saying, that you can use with all ages effectively.
I think so. And I studied science. I have a science degree and was educated by people who are actual scientists. And I think I would venture a guess that people who are actually scientists and think that way, and that's the cloth that they're cut from. This is very playful for them. Being in the lab is playing for them, right? So we're tapping into some of the pleasure they get just because of how they're built, how their minds operate. We're taking some of that onto the ski hill. Whereas like in an exploratory lesson, I might ask you, on this pitch from here to the bottom, from here to the chair, I want you to play around with using different amounts of edge angle on the way down. So top third, um, go real edgy, make them real carved. Middle turn, go like middle of the road. Bottom of the hill, keep your skis or your snowboard real flat and focus on turning the lower body more than the upper or something like that. But taking that idea of multiple variables in one run and exploring a range of things, I think that's the spirit of using exploration.
How do we do that without overloading the student, no matter what level they are? Because it's like, well, you asked me to do this and then do this and do this. And how small do we keep each direction or ask that we're giving?
Yeah, I think it depends on the person, and we always have to be cognizant of people skills and reading our students and meeting them where they are. So if you see the brow furrow, and the 1,000 yard stare, you've probably pushed it too far. So it's about keeping it simple. And obviously for kids, it's one thing at a time, and teens can handle a little bit more and everything we know about the CAP model and all that jazz.
The other thing I'm getting from this is that it sounds like you're keeping your class moving and not standing and talking around or talking much.
Well, the more you talk, the more you open yourself up, right? You
Yep.
know, yeah. And the hill's the teacher, the skis, the boards, those are the teachers, So they'll learn it from them as well as, or better than they'll learn it from me. Drew, I do want to throw in one more E that isn't written into our teaching fundamentals. And that's expeditionary learning. And uh, if you're interested, Dr. Pete Allison from Penn State, who's of course a heavy hitter helping us with our alignment process nationally. This is his body of work, but um, expeditionary learning, I think of that as a really valuable tool, and that essentially taking a trip. Like, how much do you learn when you're going to go to a new place? I really want to go to or Telluride. Maybe I've never skied there, and so I'm gonna go online and do the research, and I'm gonna plan the trip, and I'm gonna build the itinerary, and I'm gonna see if I know any locals, and I'm gonna get there, and I'm gonna ski it systematically from green, blue, black. I'm gonna go look at the terrain park. I'm gonna go to the restaurants in town, talk to the locals, notice that maybe they use different ski terminology than I do for some things and local vernacular and that stuff. And then I'm going to plan my voyage home, right? But that travel, that you learn through that. And it's like immersion learning where you just put yourself in the setting and learn from that. That's another type of learning. It's probably not possible to do like, in an assessment or um, in your typical ski or snowboard lesson, but it is another learning mechanism that, like, as pros, we can certainly benefit from that, and that's our Eastern skiers taking their trips out west and Western skiers taking their trips to the east and big mountain skiers going to little mountains and vice versa. And, Seven Springs, Hidden Valley, and Laurel Mountain are the three hills local to me. They're all three within an hour of each other. And I know pros who have not skied at the other two. Like, they work at one, that's their home hill. They haven't been to the other two. Take a day, like, make that effort to get on Google Maps and put your gear from your locker in your car and drive over there and try the food in those restaurants and ski with those folks. And you come back with an enriched experience. You're all the better for it. And that's just another type of learning called expeditionary.
Now, you did say immersion, which starts with an I, but we can still keep that in there.
Yeah, you just have to make that a subtitle.
Sort of sounds like an E. So, putting all these together, what do you have here in conclusion from this whole topic?
There are ways to structure learning environments that respect the way we think as human beings. We play naturally, we explore naturally, we experiment naturally. These are things we do as a species. So if you compare those structured learning environments to another option, which is like throwing spaghetti against the wall and hoping some of it sticks, these structured environments are more likely to create learning and more efficient results just because they respect the way we learn as humans. So as teachers, if we can understand them and purposefully use them when appropriate, I think we're increasing the odds that our students are going to learn, they're going to have a good day, and we're going to have a good day.
Exactly. It's not just the students that are playing, the instructor is having a lot of fun as well.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's challenging to do this as a teacher. It challenges you, it makes you grow as a professional. And if you get into some metacognition on your own performance, like if you think about your day on the way home and honestly look at what you did and how you did it, and did you miss any opportunities here? Did you really do a great job here? If you're into that type of growth as a pro, as a teacher, then embracing these different structures and trying to get good at them, that's a fun challenge,
Well, Angelo, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with us. I look forward to our next discussion and really appreciate you doing this.
Thank you, George. Pleasure.
From the PSIA-AASI Satellite Studios in Hood River, Oregon, I'm George Fowler.